So here we are. Are you ready to have a conscious conversation? Unity is such a great practice. It's a beautiful practice. I remember reading Charles Fillmore's words when he said, "Don't trust it because I said it. Test it against your heart. Test it against your heart." And in unity, we stand on that. Even though we have these conversations and it seems like we're giving a lesson from the stage, it's really not. It's a lesson that is brewing and emerging from all of us, from our hearts. And we test it against our heart to see where we are with it, to see what resonates. And that's one of the beauties of unity, is that it's not top down. It's not let me tell you, let this person tell that person. It's not this is the way it is, or it's my way or the highway. It's actually about experience. It's about learning and being learners. It's about teaching and knowing that we're all in each moment teaching and learning. Isn't that beautiful? Unity is about practical spirituality. That means that it applies to everything. It's not a religion per se that gets shelved and used on Sundays. It applies to our inner life and our outer life. It applies to government. It applies to politics. It applies to the food we eat. It applies to our wholeness and our health and our wellness. It applies to the collective. It applies to justice. It applies to our mind, body, and spirit. It applies to our reading and our daily walks and our meditation. It applies to the fullness and the allness of us. It applies to Mother Earth. It applies to outer space. It applies to the creatures and the beauty of nature. And that's one of the gorgeous things about our unity practice, because they're practical tools to bring everything into spirituality, to allow us to live a life that is spiritual, that is sacred, and let nothing be outside of that. Nothing has to be shelved and irrelevant. So with that practice, we become learners, right? We learn and we grow in ourselves, and we try to look at and see the spaces that we might not be paying attention, or we might have more to learn, no? And we do that through our spiritual practice, because Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, taught that our keys to this learning are our prayer and our meditation time. And abundance and the principles of abundance all come through the realm of divine ideas. And those ideas come to us through our imagination, through our creativity, and through the Spirit among us. But we often in life get caught in these little conundrums as human beings, in the human condition, having a human experience. We get caught in these little conundrums, and we think that God is doing something to us, or God has somehow created a life and a space in life, or this creation that's just bad or not good, or we did something bad and so we're being punished, or whatever it is. But we get these God concepts that are very interesting, that make God not necessarily wrong, because we tend to think of God as perfect and ourselves as the one that are wrong, right? But we make things quite difficult on ourselves in the name of God and in the name of life and what life is. And oftentimes it's us that are the difficulty makers. Have you ever noticed that in your own life, when you had an awakening and you realized, that was me? I mean, usually we realize like, oh, that was him, or that was them, or that was, right? Usually that's what the ego likes to do. The ego likes to go, oh, there it was, there it was, there it was. But sometimes in life we have these little moments where we go, oh, I was doing that. That was not making it easy on myself. That was not being godly with myself or with my environment or with my life or with my world. That was one of the things that I loved most about Unity when I first started going. That was one of the things that kept me going back. Because each Sunday, I would have these epiphanies, these awakenings, and I would realize, I was doing that. I thought that was just hard. I thought there was just something wrong with me, or wrong with them, or wrong with the world. But I actually have some space here that I can make a difference. How I respond makes a difference. What I choose makes a difference. How I see makes a difference. One of the things we hear more often than not when someone gets into unity is that people around them notice a change. They notice a shift. And they're like, what are you drinking? What are you doing? What is happening? Because you've changed somehow. There's an empowerment that happens, an accountability that happens. There's a softening that happens, a compassion that happens. When we take these practices and we look at and we say, what's my part? And that doesn't mean that there's not parts outside of ourselves, right? That there's not causes and issues and missing the mark. But it means we start here. We start right here. It means that there is more than enough work right here. That if I focus on this, I can make significant change and have a deep impact on my own experience. And in fact, something else happens when I focus on this. And I focus on this, out there changes too. It changes not because I'm strong-arming it, not because I'm hating it. It changes because my level of awareness has changed. And that changes everything. It might change who I hang out with. It might change the kind of conversations that I stick around for versus walk away from. It might change what hurts me and what just blows off. But it changes everything. But we often forget that, and our spiritual practice, our spiritual journey is about awakening to that and realizing how much good is here. You know, we just had Easter Sunday, right? And so my little one got a lot of goodies, right? And we don't usually have a ton of goodies in the house. And the ones that we do, she's not old enough to be able to hear this and know where they are. They're in a cabinet in the back right-hand corner, far, far back. They're not in reach and they're not in visibility. Well, there is one thing that is visible. But they're far away. And I remember telling myself, gosh, before I have a child, I got to make sure to step back on the ice cream a little bit, because I can't just keep doing that all the time around the child and then think the child's not going to think that ice cream is just part of the daily meal. So let's think about if we could just get ice cream when we're out and make it fun. And when it came to be Easter time, right, this little one who has treats, but not your average amount. Do you know that the top vegetable for a child, I think it's under 4 years old or something, but the top vegetable, do you know what it is? It's a French fry. Right? And we know we have an epidemic in this country of kids like drinking soda, like a whole soda. I was a teacher, and there was one time when a parent brought a can of soda in with one of my kids, and granted, I taught 4th grade and under, so a full can of soda. Not the little mini ones, but a full can of soda. And I don't know, you could probably lose your job for this today. But I was like, oh, sweetie, bring that to me. Yeah, just put that right up here. You can have that at the end of class. Like, no way in Hootenanny's heaven is that child going to drink that whole Pepsi and then sit in my classroom all day bouncing off the wall for all the rest of the kids and for me. Like, no. I don't know if you can do that today. I don't know if you're allowed to, take their soda or say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give a kindergartner soda and then expect them to sit for 8 hours. So my little one had more treats than she's had in a while on Easter, and she was just delighted. She was through the roof, literally, through the roof. And I was watching her and noticing. I have one sister, and when we were little, and granted you don't notice yourself, but we noticed her. One sister, and I don't know what we called it, but we had a little name for it, that when she had sugar, it was like, woo! It was like this party just turned on, right? And my little one, in so many ways, has my sister's energy. She has her hair color, and she might have her sugar experience. So she had a few treats, a little bit in the morning. We had a little bit during breakfast time because it's Easter, just like a little morsel, and then a little bit at lunch, and then a little bit later on in the day. And you know what happened? she was just wild. She was just wild, just completely wild. Like, even when because if you were here in our area on Easter, it was a moody day, wasn't it? So we decided to postpone the actual Easter fun festivities till Monday when it was sunny and fun to be outside. And we just had movie day. So it was like food, movies, and candy. And not a lot of candy. Like, I'm telling you, probably the amount of sugar that she had was still less than the average American child at her age for daily sugar intake. But this was for her. And so she was bouncing around, and when we were watching one of her movies, which she usually like just sits there and is like, oh, I love this movie. She was like, I mean, I have videos of it. Like, it was just, and down on the floor, up on the sky, down. It was like she just kept moving and shaking, and she was dancing. And a couple times I said, just make sure to stay back from the stairs. Just keep it over to the side, right? I am. And she was far away from the stairs. And then I went downstairs to get something, and my friend Reverend Brenda, who was with us at the house, she was in her room doing something, and my little one was still upstairs, and she's dancing. And all of a sudden I hear something get tumbled down the stairs, something roll down the stairs, like, like a box or something. I'm thinking, like, what are you doing now? Throwing something down the stairs. And I walk over, and there it is at the bottom of the stairs, flopped over. I'm okay, Mommy. And it was her. And she was fine. I mean, she has some carpet rash on her forehead and little marks on her nose and stuff like that. And I held her upside down for a little while, which I wish anyone that wasn't taking me to a chiropractor did with me when I was little. I held her upside down. But I just thought to myself, I mean, it was hilarious and it was funny because in moderation, right, you can handle anything. But it just made me think about what we do to our children. Because this is so common. And what we do to our children is that we pump them up with things that are not healthful for them. And then we send them into systems like school that have them in systems of order that work for adults that have to have management because of the numbers. So the framework of how they have to engage in that environment is not necessarily always based on what works for a child of their age. And note that you can tell that by the hours in the classroom of K through 4 versus the hours in the classroom sitting of high schoolers. Right? So the environment and how much, sometimes even in lunchrooms, they're not allowed to talk. It's supposed to be quiet. They're supposed to sit in their seats and they're supposed to eat silently. But these environments that they're in, and so you jack them up and then you send them in, and then what happens? Like you either criticize them because they're being crazy and rolling downstairs, right? Or you're like, I'm actually accountable for that right there. That was that third egg that I said go ahead and have. So that was me. But we don't do that. We put it on them. We put it on them, and then we send them into school, and then they get criticized, in trouble, and labeled. And then if you know anything about labeling theory, we do it to ourselves, we do it to anyone. But labeling theory is the second you're labeled, then you start gathering evidence for how that's true, and then you start playing into that role. So then we expect that, but then they get labeled, and then what happens? We often put them on medication, which is like wild these days. Even in my pediatrician's office, when I call to check in, the standard message says, if you're calling about ADD medication, press whatever. And then it goes on to tell you the rest of the stuff about what you might need for your medical care for your kid. So we do that, and then we wonder what's wrong with our children today. Like somehow God made a mistake, and God just messed up on this latest generation Because, they just don't sit in classrooms like my mother did, or like my father did, or my grandfather did. And they just seem to be out of control, or they just seem to not be listening. Whatever it is, fill in the blank. Something's going on with our children. I share this story not because we're all in agreement about what we eat or sugar or whatever. It doesn't matter if you don't care. It doesn't matter if right now you're like, get her away and tell her to stop talking. Ugh, I don't want to hear any more of that. That's fine. I tell this story for the purpose of it, for the meaning of it, because we do this all the time to ourselves in relation to the God concept and what it is like to be on the planet. There is one of my favorite parts in a movie. It's a favorite section of a movie, and it's the movie Cold Mountain. And Ruby is talking to her friend Ada, and she says a couple of things you really shouldn't say in church. So I'll bleep it. She says, when she's referring to the chaos that's happening and the war that's happening and how she is so frustrated in what's happening, she says, every piece of this is man's bleep. They call this war a cloud over the land, but they made the weather. Then they stand in the rain and say, bleep, it's raining. We often make the weather, and then we stand in the rain and say it's raining. We often make the weather, and then we stand in the rain and say, God, why is it raining? God, stop the rain. There is a more than enough of everything, an abundance of everything good, everything God in this life. In fact, the hard things that just happen in life that we find ourselves present to and we think, I didn't make that, or there's nothing I'm doing to create this. This is just what it is, and it's in front of me, and it's too hard. Even with those things, when we show up in godliness with each other, there is more than enough love to carry us through those moments. When we show up centered, grounded, giving, compassionate, loving, humans are incredible when they show up with their full spirit. And the salve that it brings to an aching heart, to a suffering soul, is unbelievable and sometimes just breaks the heart open to be bigger. It's more than enough. But we tend to make the weather and forget we're the ones making the weather. Marianne Williamson, who is a spiritual teacher, and as of late she was a politician, but a spiritual teacher who studies A Course in Miracles, and she gives workshops and all that stuff, and she works with a lot of people who have a lot of consciousness around how they show up, right, on the planet and for themselves, and make really mindful decisions. And so she is probably more than most people saturated with an audience or a community who eats well, who buys organic, who is very conscious of their water and whether or not it's clean and all of this stuff. And in addressing her people, she, I could tell, not necessarily got frustrated, but she made a good point in one of these workshops that I went to. She made a good point, and she said, you can do all of that. You can use your products, you can stay clean, you can exercise, you can do all of these things. You can get your little watch that tells you all the things about your body and your heart rate and all those things, what you're doing. You can do all of that. But then she says there's just so much you can wall yourself off from. There's just so much you can wall yourself off from. And she talks about when the air and the soil is polluted, when even that is not cared for. You can't wall yourself off from that. And she did that to try to get people to realize that we can't just protect ourselves, we can't just isolate ourselves, that we are a living environment, all of us, and God consciousness, and we have to show up with God consciousness to all of it. Even the stuff we don't think we care about, we got to check in And we got to ask ourselves, how could I elevate my thinking? How could I activate my mindfulness? How could I escalate my awareness here to bring more godliness to everything? We often trash things, and then we say they're not working right. Probably all of us have been guilty of doing that to our bodies to some degree, either before we were aware or just because we're like, I really like doing that, or eating that, or drinking that, or whatever it is. Or this is why I'm alive. You know, I'm alive, I have a body, so I'm willing to take some of the repercussions, right? That's how I feel about a few things. Pizza. Charles Fillmore talks about some principles that are helpful when we look at how we do life. One of the key steps for each of us and as a collective is to step out of the concept that God's doing it to us, and to really look at how on an individual and collective level we are creating. And the principle behind that is what the master teacher taught Jesus. The master teacher taught everything that I do, you shall do and more. The master teacher taught God and I are one. The master teacher taught that you are not just a human, that you are here to elevate your consciousness and your conscious awareness, and you are here as an emissary of God. You are an activity of God. You are an activity of light. That is what we are. We have to step into the principle that Charles Fillmore and spiritual teachers throughout time have taught, and the master teacher taught, that we cannot wall ourselves off from each other or anything. We cannot have systems of injustice and think we won't be affected by them. That we are, in fact, a living organism. That's what the second coming is. The second coming isn't a coming back of Jesus, the master teacher. If he came back and just walked in that same body again, could you imagine, unless he looked like the pictures everybody's got up on their walls, people would be like, you're out, buddy, you lunatic. Like, could you just imagine? There is actually a little movie about that. But could you just imagine? The second coming is about the awareness and consciousness of everyone getting what the master teacher taught. That you're it, baby. You're it. We're it. So it's time to bring it. It's time to start honoring life in all of its forms, honoring life in nature. We can't keep saying we love God as if God is sitting on a cloud. If I am not loving you, I'm not loving God. If I throw you out, I'm throwing out God. If I destroy the environment and the nature and all of its incredible beauty, I am destroying God. The way I am with one thing is the way I am with all of it, because unity consciousness is not an idea, it's an actual truth. It's a truth. It's not just something of imagination. In fact, it's in science. It's in everywhere. The breath that one breathes is the breath that all of us breathe. We are all part of this oneness. Charles Fillmore gave us one of the keys, and one of the keys to healing and to experiencing our wholeness and to activating our godliness when it comes to our human nature and it comes to these systems that are not necessarily feeling like they're working, is to look into something he called the providing law. The providing law. He says, the acquisitive, which is really the greedy, kind of the build, get more, accumulate faculty, the acquisitive faculty does not come under condemnation if the universal law is observed. I'll read that again. The acquisitive faculty, Charles Fillmore says, does not come under condemnation if the universal law is observed. So that means if we're in alignment with the universal law, then that part of us that might seem greedy, that might want to accumulate, that might want to build, that might just go, that part does not come under condemnation. Jesus said, "Seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. So in 1927, Charles Fillmore, there was a publishing of Charles Fillmore's writing in this little pamphlet, this little packet that is also included in much of one of his books. But this was studied. It was a lesson track, lesson 3 of the Unity Correspondence School lessons in 1927. And most of it wound up in the book Prosperity. And it can be also found online because TruthNet Unity put most or all of Fillmore's work online. But Fillmore says this: from the beginning of history, man has had the accumulative instinct. And as we view the world, we arrive at the conclusion that this trait is part of the universal law and a necessary factor in human existence. Accepting this as true, we must find a place for it. The acquisitive faculty does not come under condemnation if this universal law is observed. He goes on to say, everything needed will be added if you know and follow the law of righteous accumulation. There is an inherent faculty which lays hold of what it calls its own. Even little children like to have their own playthings. The power of the mind to draw to itself its own is a power that needs proper cultivation and should not be ignored. Some men, in their desire to overcome selfishness, put away everything and do not lay hold of their own. This is not the righteous fulfillment of the law. Jesus told the rich young man to sell all that he had and give to the poor and come and follow him. But he did not promise that those who follow him should have now, in the present time, even more possessions than they had to give up. But did he not, I read that wrong, but did he not promise that those who follow him should have now, in the present time, even more possessions than they have given up? In the history of Job, it is set forth that he had lost all in a certain phase of consciousness, and that after he had been renewed in the spirit of his mind, he had twice as much as he had before. So what this is showing us is that there is a right application of the law, right? If we are in principle and in practice, then this is to benefit us. But this faculty gone out of whack, if it's not tempered with spiritual practice, then that's what leads to war. That's what leads to environmental degradation. That's what leads to harming our bodies, right? Because this accumulation, I want more and more and more. What happens if we do that when we're in our bodies? I want more and more and more and more, then we're sick. What happens if we do that, with our land? We want more and more and more, then it goes to war. What happens when we do that with the environment? We want more and more and more, then there are no animals. Then there are no natural preserves and spaces. Then we're toxifying things because we're not looking at our consumption and our use. But Charles Fillmore gives us keys to how we can use that faculty and honor it, activate it, but from a spiritual point, a spiritual perspective, so that it is healthy and holy. I have a couple excerpts I want to share with you from this pamphlet. He says about greed, he says, the highest use of the accumulative faculty is the accumulation of, what do you think it is? What does he say we should accumulate? Ideas. Those who have used it to set going in their minds the idea of money as power have become the slaves of mammon. There is a righteous law of accumulation, and all who transgress it must be broken on the wheel of justice. When money makes slaves of men, the divine law has been broken, but money of itself has no power. It is the instrument that acquisitiveness uses in carrying out its designs. The love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. He goes on to say that the riches of the kingdom are permanent. The riches of the kingdom are what we build up, what we accumulate in prayer, in meditation, in ideas, with our imagination, with our creativity. He says that the highest exercise of the mind is prayer, and prayer is accumulative. He says that we're actually, that the law, that Godness is willing to give more than we're even willing or able to receive. He says that it is not money that has power to control men, but ideas. That everyone should be taught how to handle ideas and to be masterful in their presence. Then they will serve him, and he will not be under their dominion. Ideas of poverty enslave men equally with ideas of wealth. He goes on to say, nothing will be lacking in your world when you know your spiritual inheritance. See with the bountiful eye. He that hath a bountiful eye shall be blessed, from Proverbs 22:9. He says that text is based on exact law. There is a law of increase, and we fulfill it by seeing all things with a bountiful eye. But he does warn us. He says every anxiety thought must be put away. If you cut up your true ideas with cross currents of doubt and fear and anxiety, you cannot expect the word to manifest. He goes on to talk about our undisciplined mentality, and that it's really just about spiritual discipline. That every word that proceeds from our mouths is an idea. It is the word, the idea, that feeds the soul, the body, and the affairs. And that within each one of us, he says, there are two states of consciousness. They're represented by John the Baptist and Jesus. John the Baptist is the representation of moving from ignorance, separation, limited concepts, mortal mind, into the higher consciousness, the awakened state, the Christ consciousness. It's the consciousness that's taught by all world religions, and it doesn't need a name, but it's that activated, awakened state, the highest self, the self with a capital S. That this highest self, this is the supreme being within each of one of us. And through spiritual quickening, it is brought to the consciousness of every individual. So can we look at our inheritance and our birthright? Can we step into the power of the true practice? Become humble, recognize that we're here to be learners. Can we step into doing our part? To love each other, to love the earth, to love our bodies. And by loving, that means to be in harmony with, to be in stewardship of. So often that piece of scripture is misunderstood, that it's like, here's the earth, here you go, use it all, eat all the animals, cut it all down, go ahead, gorge. It's really stewardship of. It's can you be the parent of. You know, when you have a child, all of a sudden, everything that is yours becomes theirs. Like it just shifts your perspective, right? Like I no longer think about my bank account as being my bank account. I think about what can I pass on? What can I pass down? How can I help? They say the first 50 years of your life, you're thinking about you and yours and me and what I can get and how I can get better, how I can have more, how I can step up. And then in that last 50, you think about what you can give. How can I serve? What is my footprint going to look like on this planet? What organizations can I prosper? How can I be a part of the 100-year history of something that I believe in that will represent what I am and what I love, even when I'm in my freedom form? With deep consciousness, with alignment, and with practicing principles, we can calm the weather. We can calm the storm. And who and whose we are is more than enough to meet each moment. Namaste.